if you're following me on Instagram, which by the way, you totally should be, you'll know that I'm in the process of starting up writing a comic book, and that's very exciting for me because it's something that I've always wanted to do. But before I actually started writing the comic, I had a few things that I needed to learn or kind of get figured out. For example, the like how to format the comic panels, how to get some poses down that I've never really worked with before, but most notably I needed to learn how to shade in the comic book style. I'm planning on doing this comic in just on paper and pencil, and so I haven't really worked much with shading, and if you watch my videos, you'll probably know this. When I do a pencil sketch, I don't typically shade it, and so I kind of had to figure out or decide whether or not I wanted to do this digitally, which would obviously take a lot longer, or if I wanted to do it on pencil, which is something I'm a lot more comfortable with, but something that I don't really do shading with. And so it was a little bit of a dilemma there, but eventually I figured I might as well learn how to shade in the comic style and do it in pencil like I would prefer. And so I started working with shading in the comic style, doing some practice drawings and things, and it was actually a lot of fun. And I really picked it up really quickly, and honestly, it's just I do it for pretty much every pencil sketch I do now because it's just a lot of fun, and I have so much fun with it that I just will draw random things just so I can shade them. And so today I wanted to teach you guys how I learned how to shade in the comic style, and hopefully show you guys how you can learn it too, and hopefully explain it well enough. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into that. Okay, so I've got two sort of generic bases here. I've got a generic male base and a generic female base, and I'm going to show you two different sort of lighting types, I guess, for one on each of these. So I'm going to do a very dynamic lighting, and then some diffuse lighting, I guess is what it would be called. So for the dynamic lighting, I'm going to use the male base, and the dynamic lighting here is going to be a lot of shading and a lot of shading. So it's going to be very, very contrasty with itself. And so what I like to do for this, I'm going to pick a sort of lighting point. So I'll just make the lighting point coming from this direction, and I'll draw that down there so you can sort of see where I'm coming from here. And what I like to do is one thing that always makes it look cool in my opinion is shading underneath the eyes and shading completely over the eyes to give it this sort of menacing, I don't know, I think it makes it look a lot cooler. And then we're going to shade on the side of the nose. And one thing that's very, very important about this sort of style of shading is to connect the shadows. So basically what I mean by that is when there are two shadows that are very close together, don't separate them, make them connected with each other. As you can see, I combined the nose with the shading underneath the eyes and sort of made it all one big piece. And that's one very, very typical thing that happens in comic shading. It's sort of a simplification, I guess. And then we're going to shade on the top of the upper lip like this. And as you can see, I just also combined that with the shading on the nose, and then we're going to shade on the side of his head. And what I like to do here is draw out a sort of an outline. And the real thing that you need to keep in mind here is that it requires a lot of knowledge about human anatomy and sort of where the shading will go in each of these parts, like where there are going to be shadows for each part of the body. And so we're going to shade along his sort of underneath his cheekbone, I guess, and then give it a little bit of a curve towards his chin, and then underneath his chin, and we're going to add a little curved line there at the bottom. And then basically just shade that whole area. just fill that all in, and that gives you very, very dynamic, as you can already see, very dynamic lighting here. And so basically you just follow that entire process throughout the rest of his body. And so since the light's coming from this direction, this part of his neck is going to be shaded, and definitely shade. So as you can see here, definitely leave sort of open areas in your shading. Like this would be the top of part of his neck muscle here. So I left that open because that would be more prone to getting light from like reflections off of his own skin and stuff like that, reflections off of the environment, whatever. And we're going to shade sort of the same shape as his head to give his head some, or to give his neck some realistic shading there. We're going to shade. I'm going to give a sort of curved line along his, I don't really know what that muscle is called. I always forget the name of this muscle here. I believe the abbreviation for it is traps, but I don't know the full scientific name. But just do a little curved line on that, and then shade or like darken the line on the top of the pectoral here, and just shade the rest of it. And we're gonna carry that over into his shoulder, just like that. And I may end up darkening that a little bit more, but onto the pectoral muscles. These are probably the most prominent and the most, in my opinion, the coolest looking part when you do this kind of shading on characters like this. So the first thing you want to do is fill in the entire middle in between, because that part's going to be set in if you're using the body type that this guy has, which is probably sort of, you could probably call it built or cut, whatever you want to call that. And then what we're going to do is, since the light's coming from this direction, we're going to do a curved line like this, and you can see these little tiny sort of light lines that I drew for the sides of, or for the sort of muscle contours in his chest. And so we're going to sort of do a curved line to the first one of those, curved line to the next one of those, and then for the bottom we curve all the way out just like that, and then shade that whole area. And then what you want to do is follow along with these lines that I just talked about, and just do a few of those just like so. And then on this side, since this side is going to be getting more direct light, underneath you're going to do, or on the very bottom, you're going to do just a very gradual curve there. Shade or darken these lines here and sort of splay out the bottom to give them more dimension like that. And then on the other side, we're gonna just do a curved line like this, and we're gonna connect this line with the line for his deltoid there, and there you go. And hopefully I'm making this sort of look like what I'm explaining, because I don't really know the best way to explain it. I'm just kind of trying to demonstrate my process a little bit. But yeah, hopefully you guys can follow along with this relatively easily. So we're gonna shade his tricep here, his entire tricep. We're gonna shade behind his bicep, and then a little bit on top of his bicep, just not very much. Connect that with the shading on the shoulder. Continue your way down, and shade on the back of the forearm. And remember, the lighting is coming from this direction, which is why I'm shading in these areas. Obviously, if the light was going from a different direction, you'd want to shade in other areas. You wouldn't want the shadows to be on this side if the light was coming from here, or any other area other than where it is right now. We're gonna shade the back of the hand just like this. And one thing you can do is add some lines like this to sort of represent the tendons in his hand that are controlling his fingers. And we're gonna darken a few lines over here just to give it more definition. And then we can darken the other side of his arm and then the whole underside right here. And then underneath his rib cage there. Once again, underneath his rib cage. Since the light's coming from more on the top, we can shade that whole part and then follow along with this sort of shape here and shade that whole area just like so. And then you can shade behind here, behind his sort of stomach there. And then for the abs, these are also very fun for me to actually do. Basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna find our lighting source. Obviously we've already defined that right there. And then draw a line that sort of curves so that your light source is in the same direction as, or your light source is sort of pointing or on the same side and in the same orientation up and down as the light source that you defined earlier, and then just shade the rest of it just like so. And I do that for all of his abs, however many you want to give them. Typically you want to give characters like this abs that are either, it is possible for a person to have an 8-pack, but there's a sort of genetic thing that determines whether or not you can have one, so it's not normally possible, but yeah, it just depends. And then shade in the rest of the area here in between the abs, and then on this side, or on whatever side the light is not on. And then for these muscles here, do basically the same thing. They're just a little bit longer, a little bit taller. And then for his arm here, or his other arm, I should say, do underneath the bicep. We'll do a little bit on top of the bicep. And then under the forearm, right here where his muscle is, under his thumb, his fingers, and just darken a few areas that look a little bit too light, or just refine a few things if you need to. And there you have it. There's some very, very dynamic comic style shading. And honestly, I really, really love, this is probably my favorite type of shading, just because it just looks so cool when you're fully finished with it. Yeah, so this is the kind of shading that I really love to do. But that is dynamic, or sort of hard light, I guess you could call it. So now I'm gonna move to diffuse light. This would be sort of the lighting that you would have on sort of like an overcast type of scene, or like there's more like ambient light around the area. So like say they're in like some sort of room where there's a lot of lights on the ceiling or something like that. That's where you would use this kind of lighting. This would be more like spotlight, or like outside where the sun is the primary source of lighting, or if it's at night and there's like street lights or whatever, and the street, like there's just like a single street light that's the only source of light here. Oh, also I'm gonna do this, darken that up a little bit, make that look a little bit more three-dimensional there. But anyway, so yeah, we'll move on to the diffuse lighting, and this one's a lot more simple. This one should be a lot faster. The shadows, so we're gonna use the same light source direction, I guess. But this one, you don't need to shade the entire eyes. You can just shade like underneath the eyes, just in pretty much the same shape you did here, but don't shade the eyes, and don't, yeah, just don't darken the entire area underneath there. It's a lot smaller, and shade on the side of the nose, on the top of the top lip, whatever. But for this one, this is going to be like a primary light source, I guess. But since this is diffused light, this is less direct than this one. But for this one, so it's basically following the same shapes as this one, but it's just a lot less contrast, if that makes sense. So we're basically following the same pattern, but there's not as much to sorry, I just lost my train of thought. And I normally don't cut these tutorial type videos because I want you guys to be able to follow along with my entire process. And so anyway, with the diffused light, there's just not as many shadows to deal with, and so therefore there's not there's not much need for very hard and very large shadows like over here. So you can, like I said, you can follow the same sort of shapes and outlines here. And I'm getting graphite dust on. I should have started with this one because I'm getting graphite dust all over my hand. Anyway, shade under her arm, just like this. Under her rib cage. You can shade her abs. And obviously you wouldn't see like something like the abs or the inside of his pectoral, whatever, if you had clothes on these characters or whatever. So there would be parts of these that you probably wouldn't see. So some of this isn't entirely necessary, but anyway, yeah. So like I said, it's pretty much the same sort of technique or the same sort of style of shading, or the same shapes and same process. It's just you're doing a lot less shading than you were over here. Darken up a few areas, just like that. You know, once again, keep in mind your anatomy knowledge and stuff. And there you go. That's pretty much all you need to do for diffused lighting. So yeah, there's our final product for each of them. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is my sort of tutorial, sort of just how I do comic style shading, and just how yeah, I just wanted to show you guys my process of doing comic style shading and how I sort of learned how to do it. And so, yeah, hopefully you guys found this useful. If you're at all interested in comic writing or comic art, and you can see all the graphite dust on my hand, definitely should have worn my little glove thing, but I digress. Yeah, like I said, hopefully you guys found this helpful, and yeah, so subscribe if you haven't, leave a like on the video if you liked it, a dislike if you didn't, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.